The woman smiled at Michael across the engagement party. Warm, beautiful, perfect. Then she turned around, walked straight to the bathroom, and called another man. Michael heard every word. He wasn't supposed to be in that hallway. He wasn't supposed to hear her voice drop to something low and urgent and intimate in a way it never once sounded with Daniel. He wasn't supposed to catch the name she used, the promises she made, the laugh she saved for someone who wasn't wearing her ring. He stood there, back against the wall, champagne going warm in his hand. 30 feet away, his best friend was telling a room full of people he was the luckiest man alive. Michael looked down at his glass, set it carefully on a side table, and walked back into the party like he hadn't just heard the whole thing collapse. Because the woman who blew up Daniel's world that night wasn't Vanessa. It was someone Daniel hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Someone who had been waiting and watching since long before the ring ever came out. What city are you watching from? Drop it below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to walk away from this one. The drive to Riverside took Michael 45 minutes in traffic, which gave him exactly 45 minutes to talk himself out of going. He almost succeeded. 3 times he reached for the exit ramp. 3 times he kept driving. Not because he wanted to be there. Not because he was in the mood to eat tiny food off little plates and watch people he barely knew clink champagne glasses and pretend everything in the world was wonderful. He kept driving because Daniel had called him that morning and said, "Mike, brother, I need you there." And Michael Carter had never once in his life been able to say no to that man. So he drove. He pulled into the long circular driveway of the Harrington estate because, of course, Daniel's future in-laws had an estate, and sat in his truck for a full 2 minutes before he killed the engine. The truck was a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a pine tree air freshener that hadn't smelled like anything in 6 months. Around him, valets in black vests were parking Teslas and Mercedes-Benzes, and at least one Bentley that probably cost more than Michael had earned in the last 3 years combined. He was wearing dark jeans, a charcoal gray button-down he'd ironed twice because the collar kept flipping up, and dress shoes he'd bought at Target 3 years ago for a job interview he didn't get. He stepped out of the truck. A valet kid couldn't have been more than 19, looked at the F-150, then looked at Michael, then very carefully arranged his face into neutral professionalism. "Sir, I'll take your keys. Be gentle with her. She's got feelings." The kid didn't know what to do with that, so he just nodded. Michael walked toward the entrance. Daniel Reyes had been Michael's best friend since they were both 11 years old, sitting in the back of the same 6th grade classroom in Pasadena, both of them pretending to understand fractions. They had grown up 2 streets apart, played baseball together until their knees gave out, stood beside each other at Michael's wedding 7 years ago when Michael married Sarah. Daniel had also been standing beside Michael at Sarah's funeral 4 years later. That was the kind of friendship they had, the kind that didn't need explaining. Daniel came from a working-class Mexican-American family. His father had run a small landscaping business. His mother had worked the checkout at the same grocery store for 22 years. But Daniel had been relentlessly, almost aggressively smart, had earned a full scholarship to UCLA, and had spent the following decade turning that education into a genuinely successful career in commercial real estate. He wasn't wealthy the way the people at this party were wealthy. But he had done well, better than anyone who grew up on their street had ever expected. Which was probably, Michael sometimes thought, why Daniel had started dating Vanessa Harrington in the first place. Not that he'd ever say that out loud. Vanessa was 27, beautiful in the way that came with good bone structure and very expensive skincare. And she came from the kind of family that had a wing named after them at the local university. Her father, Richard Harrington, was the kind of man who shook hands too hard and looked at you like he was calculating your net worth while you were still talking. Her mother, Caroline, smiled constantly but never with her eyes. Michael had met Vanessa 3 times before tonight. She had been perfectly pleasant each time. Perfectly. like she'd been calibrated. He'd never once felt like she'd actually looked at him. The inside of the Harrington estate was everything Michael expected, and worse. Crystal chandeliers, catering staff moving through the crowd with trays of food that cost too much and couldn't fill you up. A string quartet in the corner playing something classical that everyone was ignoring. Flower arrangements taller than Michael's son, everything white and gold and carefully, deliberately beautiful. He spotted Daniel across the room almost immediately. Daniel was standing with Vanessa, both of them, surrounded by people Michael didn't recognize: older men in suits, women with jewelry that caught the light every time they moved. Daniel was laughing. His arm was around Vanessa's waist. He looked happy. He looked so happy. Michael felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest, and he decided to find the bar before he analyzed it. He got himself a beer. He almost asked for a Bud Light before he caught himself, and ordered whatever craft thing they had on tap, and found a relatively quiet spot near the edge of the room where he could stand without feeling like he was in anyone's way. He watched the party. This was what he did. He'd gotten good at it over the years, the quiet watching. After Sarah died, he'd stopped being the kind of person who moved through rooms easily. He'd become someone who stood at the edges and observed. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was more like he'd learned to take up less space. His son Eli was home with a babysitter tonight. 7 years old and already too perceptive for his own good. He'd noticed Michael ironing the shirt twice and said, "Dad, are you nervous about something?" with the kind of casual accuracy that kids sometimes had, the kind that stopped you cold. "Just trying to look nice, bud. You always look nice to me." God, that kid. Michael took a long sip of his beer and watched the string quartet, and tried not to count the hours until he could reasonably leave. He almost missed her. She was standing near the windows on the far side of the room, not talking to anyone. That was what caught his attention first, not her appearance, not the understated elegance of her black dress, not the way she carried herself like someone accustomed to being watched. What caught his attention was that she was still in a room full of movement. Everyone else at this party was performing, working the room, making impressions, establishing pecking orders. This woman was just standing there, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, watching the room with an expression Michael couldn't quite read from this distance. He looked away, looked back. She was still watching the room. And now he could read the expression a little better. She was worried about something. He didn't approach her. That wasn't Michael's style. He finished his beer, checked his. Eli's babysitter had sent a photo of the boy passed out on the couch with a half-eaten bag of popcorn on his chest, which was the best thing Michael had seen all week, and then went to find Daniel. Daniel grabbed him by both shoulders when he saw him. "You came. I was starting to think you bailed on me. I thought about it. I know you thought about it. That's why I called you 3 times this morning. You called me twice. The third call I thought about, but didn't make because I was giving you space to make the right decision on your own. That's very mature of you. I'm a mature person." Daniel grinned. "Mike, what do you think? Be honest." Michael looked around at the party, the estate, the people. "I think your in-laws have too much house. They really do. You should see the East Wing. There's a billiards room, Mike. Nobody in this family plays billiards. It's purely decorative. That's not a billiards room. That's a status room." "Exactly." Daniel laughed, and for a moment he sounded exactly like the 11-year-old kid from the back of 6th grade math class. "Listen, Vanessa wants to meet you properly, officially." "Come on. Daniel, come on." Vanessa Harrington was even more beautiful up close, which was somehow more unsettling than reassuring. She had the kind of face that photographers loved, all clean symmetry and perfect proportion, and she smiled at Michael with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Michael, I've heard so much about you. Daniel talks about you constantly. He's exaggerating, whatever he told you. He said you're the most honest person he knows." Michael glanced at Daniel. "That part might be accurate. He also said you make the best chili in California." That part is completely accurate. The honest part was understated, actually. Vanessa laughed. It was a good laugh, natural, unrehearsed. The first genuinely unguarded thing Michael had seen from her. And then, for just a fraction of a second, something moved across her face. Not guilt. Not quite. Something more like strain. Like someone holding a heavy thing and working very hard not to let anyone see the effort. It was gone almost instantly. She touched Daniel's arm and said something about needing to greet her father's colleagues. And then she was moving away through the crowd. And Daniel was watching her go with that expression men get when they're looking at the person they've decided is going to be their whole future. "She's great, right?" Daniel said. "She seems great." Daniel heard the seems. He looked at Michael sharply. "Mike, she seems great, Daniel. I mean that." Michael paused. "You're happy?" "I'm the happiest I've ever been." And he looked it. That was the problem. He looked genuinely, completely, unguardedly happy. The kind of happy that made you ache when you knew something the person didn't. Except Michael didn't know anything. Not yet. He was making his way back toward the bar, switching to club soda, because he was driving when someone touched his elbow. He turned. It was the woman from the window, the still one. Up close, she was younger than he'd estimated from across the room, late 20s, maybe 30 at the most. Dark hair pulled back simply. The black dress was expensive without announcing itself. She had the kind of face that would photograph terribly, because it did all its work in person, in the small movements, and the particular way the light caught it. She said, "You're Michael Carter." Not a question. "I am. And you're Rachel. Rachel Reza." She paused. "Daniel is my brother." Michael stared at her. In 11 years of friendship with Daniel Reyes, he had heard Daniel mention a sister exactly twice. Once when they were teenagers, and Daniel had said my sister would hate this movie about a film they were watching, and once at Sarah's funeral when Daniel had said his sister couldn't make it because she was abroad for work. He had never seen a photograph. He had never heard a name. Rachel Reyes had existed, in Michael's understanding of his best friend's life, as a vague theoretical person somewhere in the background. "Daniel never told me. Daniel and I haven't spoken in almost 3 years." The way she said it was completely flat. Not bitter. Not sad. Just factual. The way you state something you've processed so thoroughly that the emotion has been worn smooth. "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I didn't know. Nobody here does." Except Richard Harrington. Her eyes moved briefly across the room. "He knows exactly who I am." Something about the way she said that made Michael pay closer attention. "How do you know the Harringtons?" "I work in financial compliance." "I have for the last 7 years." She looked at him steadily. 3 months ago, my firm was hired to conduct an audit. Not of this family directly, of a company connected to Vanessa's family business. A holding company that exists on paper in the Cayman Islands and almost nowhere else. Michael was quiet. "What did you find?" "A lot." She finally took a sip of her sparkling water. "And then 3 weeks ago, I found something I wasn't looking for." She reached into the small clutch bag on her arm and removed her phone. She held it with the screen facing her for a moment, like she was deciding something. Then she turned it toward him. It was a photograph. Vanessa Harrington, clear as daylight, in what appeared to be a restaurant. Sitting across from a man. The man's hand was on the table, and Vanessa's hand was on top of it. They were leaning toward each other in the particular way that people lean when they're in the conversation that is more important than any other conversation they're having in their lives. When was this taken? 6 weeks ago, 4 weeks after Daniel announced the engagement. Michael handed the phone back. He looked at the party. Daniel was laughing again across the room, Vanessa at his side. "Rachel," he said her name slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he's my brother." For the first time, something cracked slightly in her voice. Just slightly. "Because I've been standing outside this family for 3 years, and I can't just walk back in there and tell him this. He doesn't trust me. He doesn't." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He doesn't know why I left, And I can't explain it in 5 minutes at an engagement party. And I need someone who can actually reach him. What happened? Between you and Daniel? That's a long conversation. Then give me the short version. She was quiet for a moment. Then I told him something he didn't want to hear about someone he trusted. Years ago, he chose the other person. He was wrong too, and eventually he figured that out. But by then I'd already built a life somewhere else, and she stopped again. The pattern is familiar to me. That's what I'm saying. And I can't watch him make the same mistake. Michael looked at her. At the careful steadiness of her. At the effort it was costing her to stand in this house and hold this information. How much more is there, he said, beyond the photograph? Enough. There's a man named Curtis Wade. He and Vanessa have been together on and off, by the looks of it, for at least 2 years. Before Daniel, during Daniel. She paused. Curtis Wade is also currently under federal investigation for wire fraud connected to the Harrington Holding Company. Michael said nothing. If Daniel marries her, his name goes on documents. His credit, his finances, his professional reputation, all of it becomes connected to people who are very carefully managing a situation that is going to become public. Maybe in a year, maybe in 3, but it's going to. You're sure? I'm a compliance auditor, Mr. Carter. Being sure is my entire job. Michael. She looked at him. Will you help me tell him? He looked out at the party. At Daniel's face. At the happiness on it. At the fragility of that happiness. Now that he knew what he knew. The most honest person he knows. That was what Vanessa had said Daniel called him. Michael understood, standing there with a glass of club soda in his hand, at a party he hadn't wanted to attend, that some descriptions become their own kind of burden. Yeah, he said. I'll help you tell him. They spent the rest of the party not talking to each other. This was Rachel's suggestion. If Richard Harrington sees us together too long, he'll know something is wrong, and Michael had agreed, without fully understanding how. She knew that Richard Harrington was paying attention to either of them specifically, but something in her certainty made him trust her read of the room. So Michael stood at the edges and watched, and now that he knew what to watch for, he saw things he'd missed before. He saw Richard Harrington look at Rachel from across the room twice, both times with an expression that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite threat, but lived somewhere in the territory between them. He saw Vanessa touch Daniel's arm the way you touch someone when you're performing affection for an audience. He saw or thought he saw and hated himself for noticing the way Vanessa's phone lit up twice in the span of an hour, and the way she stepped slightly away from Daniel each time before glancing at the screen. He watched Daniel laugh and shake hands and be the best version of himself, the version that had clawed its way up from a working-class neighborhood and made something real. And he felt the specific sadness of knowing that someone is walking toward a wall they can't yet see it. And then there was a moment, just one, when Daniel caught Michael's eye from across the room and grinned. The same grin he'd had at 11 years old. Brother. You came. Michael smiled back and thought, I'm going to have to break your heart. And I'm going to do it because I love you. And that's the worst kind of thing there is. He found Rachel near the exit as the party began winding down. Tomorrow, he said, I can be at your place by 10. Or wherever you want to meet. There's a diner on Clement Street. Harborview. They don't rush you out, I know it. She paused. I grew up near there. Of course she did. She and Daniel had grown up 2 streets from Michael. He had walked past their house 100 times without knowing she existed. I'll be there at 10, Rachel said. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Several things. She was clearly a person who ran calculations constantly, who processed and weighed and measured before she spoke. For what it's worth, Michael said, it took guts to come here tonight. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice. You could have mailed him the evidence anonymously and watched from a distance. You chose to be here. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully identify, something between surprise and the particular guardedness of someone who isn't accustomed to being accurately perceived. Good night, Michael. Good night, Rachel. He drove home. He sat in the parking lot of his building for 10 minutes. Engine off, the pine tree air freshener doing absolutely nothing. And he thought about Daniel's face, about the photograph on Rachel's phone, about the name Curtis Wade, and federal investigations and paper companies in the Cayman Islands. He thought about Sarah, about how she had died not knowing any of the things that turned out to matter, and how Michael had spent 4 years since then, wishing he'd said things differently, sooner, louder. He thought about honesty, about what it cost, about who it was really for. Then he went upstairs, paid the babysitter, carried Eli from the couch to his bed, pulled the blanket up, and stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long moment. Dad, Eli's voice, thick with sleep. "Yeah, bud, it's me. Go back to sleep. Was the party good?" Michael considered the question with the full seriousness it deserved. "Something important happened," he said. "I'm not sure if it was good yet. But it was important." Eli processed this in the way 7-year-olds process things, which is to say he was asleep again in approximately 4 seconds. Michael stood there a little longer. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself a cup of coffee he didn't need, and sat at the table where the torn invitation halves were still lying, and he thought about what came next. He called Rachel at 9 the next morning. Not because he had anything new to say. He just needed to confirm the meeting was real, that the conversation at the party hadn't been something he'd constructed out of beer and discomfort and the particular loneliness of standing in a room where you didn't belong. She answered on the second ring. "I'll be there at 10, she said, before he could speak. "I just wanted to—" "I know. It's real, Michael. I'll see you at 10. He hung up, started the coffee, made Eli breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, because it was a Saturday and Saturday meant scrambled eggs, and dropped him at his neighbor Mrs. Papadopoulos's house, who was 73 years old and regarded Eli with the ferocious love of a grandmother who had run out of grandchildren to spoil. "Big plans today?" Mrs. Papadopoulos asked. "Just meeting someone for coffee." "A woman someone?" "Mrs. P. I'm asking because you ironed your shirt." "I iron my shirts. Michael Carter. I have lived next to you for 4 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times you have ironed a shirt. It is a Saturday morning, and you are wearing an ironed shirt, and you have done something with your hair." "My hair looks normal. It looks like you tried." "That's different." She shooed him away. "Go. Take your time." Rachel was already at Harborview when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee and a folder on the table in front of her. The folder was thick. She looked different in daylight. Last night she'd been contained, controlled, perfectly calibrated to the environment. Here, in a diner where the coffee came in, heavy ceramic mugs, and the booth vinyl had cracked in exactly the way that meant something had been repaired twice and given up on the third time, she looked more like a person who was tired, though not the performance of tired, actual tired. "You sleep?" he asked, sliding into the booth. "A little. You?" "Some." The waitress, a woman named Gloria, who had been working at Harborview since Michael started coming there 3 years ago and greeted him every time like she'd been hoping he'd show up, filled his mug without being asked. "The usual?" Gloria said. "Just coffee today, thanks." Gloria glanced at Rachel with the particular assessment of someone who has watched a regular customer for years and knows the significance of who shows up with them. She left them alone. Rachel opened the folder. For the next 40 minutes, she walked him through it. Not all of it, the full audit, was hundreds of pages, but the relevant pieces. The Harrington Cayman Holding Company, which existed primarily to move money between entities in ways that systematically avoided reporting requirements. Curtis Wade, who appeared on documents connected to several of those entities, and who had been quietly flagged by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit 18 months ago. And the communication records not hacked, nothing illegal, all properly subpoenaed in the course of the investigation that showed a sustained, ongoing relationship between Vanessa and Curtis that had continued, with what appeared to be full deliberateness, throughout and after her relationship with Daniel began. She knew, Michael said. Yes, she started dating Daniel while this was going on. There's a theory which I cannot prove but my experience suggests is credible that the relationship with Daniel was partially strategic. His name, his professional reputation, a certain kind of legitimacy. The Harrington business has some exposure right now. Having a well-regarded, independently successful partner in the family is useful optics. Michael sat with that for a moment. You're saying she's using him. I'm saying the evidence is consistent with that interpretation. Not in a let me soften this way. I need to know what you actually think. Rachel looked at him directly. I think she is using him. I think she is a person who has been taught by her family that people are instruments, and I think my brother does not know that world exists. Yes, that's what I think. Okay. Michael looked down at the folder. Then back up. We need to tell him today. I know. Not tomorrow. Not after we've figured out the perfect way to say it. Today, because every day we wait is a day he's planning a wedding with someone who... I know, Michael. Her voice was quiet. I've been carrying this for 3 weeks. I know. He stopped, looked at her. 3 weeks. She'd had this for 3 weeks. Why did you wait? I wasn't sure he'd believe me. I'm not, she stopped. Our relationship is complicated. I told you. Tell me more. Because if we sit down with him today and he doesn't know why you're there, why his sister he hasn't spoken to in 3 years is suddenly showing up at his engagement party and tearing his life up. I know how it'll look. He'll think it's personal. He'll think you have a reason that has nothing to do with Vanessa. I know, so tell me what happened between you two. Rachel wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. She looked out the window at the street. 2 kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk. An elderly man was walking a dog that appeared to be mostly legs. 6 years ago, she said slowly, Daniel was in business with a man named Greg Powell. Commercial real estate, early in his career. They were partners. I found out I was doing compliance work even then, lower level, but I had access to certain things. I found out that Greg Powell was falsifying numbers. Lying to their investors. The kind of thing that gets people indicted. What did you do? I told Daniel. And he didn't believe me. He said, I was jealous of his success. He said Greg was the best partner he'd ever had, and I was trying to sabotage something good because I'd always had a problem with watching other people be happy. She paused. He was wrong about the jealousy. He was right that I'd always had trouble watching other people be happy. But not for the reason he thought. What happened to Greg Powell? He was indicted 14 months later. Daniel lost about $60,000 and had to spend 2 years very carefully demonstrating to the commercial real estate community that he'd had no knowledge of what Greg was doing. He got through it. But by the time it happened, I'd already moved to Boston for work, and the call I expected never came. He never called to say you were right. He never called. Period. She looked back at Michael. So when I tell you that, I understand exactly why he's going to look at me across the table today and wonder if I have an angle, yes. I understand that completely. And I'm doing this anyway because I am not going to let him walk into a fatal mess because I was too scared of his reaction to speak up again. The diner hummed around them. Gloria refilled both coffees without being asked. Michael said, he's going to feel terrible about what happened with Greg Powell. That's not why I'm telling him. I know, but he's going to feel it anyway, and that's going to be part of this conversation today, whether you plan for it or not. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not softening, exactly. More like the slight adjustment of someone recalibrating. You think about these things. I've had a lot of conversations I didn't know how to have. The grief stuff? He was quiet for a moment. Part of it. And just... He paused. When you're raising a kid alone, you learn that there's no version of the hard conversation where you get to avoid the hard parts. You can pace it. You can time it. But you can't skip the thing that hurts. Rachel looked at him in the way she'd looked at him the previous night. That particular quality of attention. Like she was seeing something she hadn't expected and was deciding what to do with it. He's lucky to have you, she said. Daniel. He'd say the same about you if he remembered why. A long silence. Then she closed the folder and said, I'll call him. Daniel met them at Michael's apartment at 3 in the afternoon. He was confused from the moment he walked in, confused by the her specifically, by the presence of the woman standing in Michael's living room, who was unquestionably his sister, the same eyes, the same line of the jaw, both of them inheriting something from their mother that Daniel had told Michael about exactly once, a long time ago. Rachel? Her name in his mouth sounded like something he hadn't said in so long it had become strange. Hey, Danny, the old nickname. Michael watched Daniel's face do several things in rapid succession: shock, confusion, a flash of something old and painful, and then the shutting down, the controlled neutrality of someone protecting themselves. What is this? Michael said. Sit down, Daniel. Mike, what? Sit down, please. Daniel sat. He looked at Rachel. He looked at Michael. He looked at the folder on the coffee table. What is that? Daniel. Michael pulled his chair forward. You're my brother. You're the person I trust most in this world, and I need you to hear me when I say that what we're about to tell you comes entirely from that. From nothing else. Okay? You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. Listen. Rachel opened the folder. What followed was the hardest 45 minutes Michael had experienced since a doctor had sat across the table from him and talked about his wife's prognosis. The precision of that comparison wasn't lost on him as he watched Daniel's face move through the stage's confusion, rejection, resistance, more rejection, the specific anger of someone whose defenses are working exactly as designed, and then the slow, terrible cracking as the evidence became impossible to argue with. Daniel didn't yell. That surprised Michael. He'd expected yelling. What he did was go very quiet. The quieter he got, the more the room seemed to contract. The photograph, he said finally. When was it? 6 weeks ago, Rachel said. I can give you the exact date. Curtis Wade, yes. And he's under federal investigation. Yes. The Harrington family has significant exposure in the same case. Daniel looked at his hands. How long have you had this? 3 weeks. Why didn't you? Because you haven't spoken to me in 3 years, Daniel. Her voice stayed even. Barely. Because the last time I tried to tell you something like this, you told me I was jealous and selfish, and I watched Greg Powell destroy $60,000 of your money and 2 years of your reputation before you figured out I was right. I had to decide whether I was willing to do this again. Whether I could come to you, knowing how you'd look at me. The silence in the room had texture. I'm here, she said quietly. I'm here because you're my brother, and I'm not willing to watch you walk into this. Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red at the edges. He looked at Michael. You believe her. I've seen the documentation. I believe the documentation, and I believe her. And you, he stopped. You sat at my engagement party. You shook her hand. I know. She told you she was happy to meet you. Daniel, she said you were the most honest person she knew. His voice broke slightly on the last word. Caught itself. What does that mean now? What does any of it? Hey, Michael leaned forward. It means she was wrong about herself. Not about you. Daniel stared at him. Trusting her wasn't a failure, Daniel. It's not a character flaw that you loved someone who was lying to you. That's her failure, not yours. The room was very quiet. Then Daniel put his face in his hands, and Michael put his hand on his best friend's back, and Rachel sat across from them both, with the folder closed on the table between them, and no one said anything for a while. There was nothing to say. Some truths don't need a response. They just need time to settle into the shape of a life that has to rearrange itself around them. Daniel sat up eventually. He wiped his face. He looked at his sister. 3 years, he said. I owe you. Not today, Rachel said. Today doesn't need to be about us. We have time for that. He nodded, sat back, looked at the ceiling. Then he said, very quietly, into the air above him, what am I going to do? Michael leaned back in his chair. Right now? Nothing. Right now you're going to sit here for as long as you need to. Then I'm going to make the worst cup of coffee you've ever had in your life, because I still haven't learned how to use the machine properly. And then when you're ready, We're going to figure out the next step. Together. Daniel almost laughed. The almost law was painful and real and completely human. The worst cup of coffee, he repeated. Genuinely terrible. I apologize in advance. And Michael got up and went to the kitchen, and behind him he could hear Daniel's breathing slowly steady, and he could hear Rachel say something too quiet to catch, and Daniel respond in the same quiet register. And he stood at the coffee machine with his hands on the counter and felt the specific weight of doing the right thing. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing in the rubble of someone's perfect future and knowing you were the one who told the truth that brought it down. But he also knew, in the way you know things that have been earned, rather than taught, that the alternative was worse. The alternative was always worse. He made the coffee. It was, as promised, genuinely terrible. Daniel drank it anyway. The coffee was cold by the time Daniel finally spoke again. He hadn't touched it, he just held the mug in both hands, like it was the only solid thing in the room, staring at a spot on the floor between his feet, and Michael had let him. Some silences you don't fill. You just sit in them and let the other person find their way back to the surface on their own timeline. Rachel had her hands folded on the table. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes. She had the stillness of someone who had prepared for this moment for weeks and was now simply yin, the part that came after preparation, the part where you couldn't control anything anymore. Daniel set the mug down. She called him. Not a question. A statement. Like he was placing something on a shelf he needed to look at directly before he could deal with it. At the party, Michael said, "Yes, you heard it." "I heard enough." Daniel nodded slowly. The kind of nodding that isn't agreement, it's just the body needing to do something, while the mind processes something too large to process quickly. "What did she say?" "Daniel, tell me what she said, Mike." Michael looked at him. At the particular set of his jaw, the way Daniel always looked when he was holding himself together, with the specific effort of a man who had decided falling apart, was not an option right now, even when it absolutely should be. "She called him baby," Michael said. "She said she'd see him Thursday." She said. He paused. She said she missed him. The room went very quiet. Daniel's jaw tightened, loosened. His eyes didn't change expression so much as they lost something, a light going out, quiet and final, like a bulb burning through its last filament. "Thursday," he said. "Yeah, that's 3 days from now." "I know." Another long silence. "Then how long have you known before last night?" "I didn't know anything before last night. Rachel found me at the party. Everything I know, I learned in the last 18 hours. Daniel looked at his sister. 3 weeks, he said. "You had this for 3 weeks?" "Yes. And you came to a party. You drove to my engagement party and stood in the same room as her and didn't—" He stopped. Started again. "Why didn't you just call me? Why didn't you pick up a phone and call me the day you found out?" Rachel's hands unfolded on the table. She flattened her palms against the surface, like she was steadying herself. "Because the last time I called you to tell you something you didn't want to hear, you didn't speak to me for 3 years." The sentence landed in the room like something physical. Daniel flinched, just slightly, but Michael saw it. "That's not," Daniel started. "I'm not saying it to punish you. I'm saying it because it's true and because I needed to make sure before I came to you that I had everything. Everything. Because I knew that if there was a single gap in what I was showing you, one piece missing, one thing you could point to and question, you would point to it. And then we'd be here with nothing resolved and 3 more years of silence and a wedding date circled on your calendar." She met his eyes. "I wasn't willing to risk that, so I waited until it was airtight." Daniel sat with that. "Greg Powell," he said finally. "You don't have to. I was wrong about that." He looked at his hands. "I was wrong, and I knew it maybe 6 after it happened, and I didn't call you because I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like..." He exhaled. "I don't know what I thought it would sound like. I just kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept not coming, and then enough time passed that it seemed too late." "Yeah, it wasn't," Rachel said quietly. "It wasn't too late then. It isn't too late now. Daniel looked at her. Something moved across his face, something old and complicated and exhausted. I have a lot to make up for. You do. But that's a different conversation. That's a conversation for when today is over. He nodded. Looked back at the folder, didn't open it. What do I do? He said. Practically. What do I actually do? Rachel leaned forward. First thing, don't contact Vanessa yet. Not until we've talked through how you want to handle this. If she finds out you know, and she gets to her family's lawyers, before you've protected yourself. I don't care about protecting myself. I know you don't. That's exactly why I'm saying it. Rachel Daniel, her voice stayed steady. Careful. Curtis Wade is under federal investigation. The Harrington Holding Company is connected to that investigation. If you confront Vanessa emotionally and unprepared, and she or her father makes decisions in the next 48 hours to manage their exposure, you could get pulled into a paper trail that takes years to untangle. I care about your heart. I also need you to protect your name. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Michael. Is she always like this? I only met her last night. She's always been like this, Daniel said, and there was something in it, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. Even when we were kids, she was always the one with the whole picture. Rachel looked at the table. Something around her eyes changed, not quite emotion, but the shadow of it. Michael said, So what's the plan? The plan, as Rachel laid it out over the next hour, was methodical and unsparing. She had clearly built it over the 3 weeks she'd been sitting on this information, refined it, tested it against contingencies, walked it back from every direction to find the holes. Daniel would not call or text Vanessa. He would not change any behavior that might signal something was wrong. He had a meeting with her scheduled for dinner on Wednesday, 2 days away, and he would keep that meeting, but he would do it after speaking with an attorney who specialized in asset protection, whose number Rachel already had, because she had already called to check on availability. The engagement itself had been formally announced in 3 publications. Those announcements would need to be formally retracted, which the attorney could also help navigate. Daniel owned a condo in his name only and had no joint finances with Vanessa, yet they had discussed combining accounts after the wedding, which meant he had not yet been woven into the financial structure that was under investigation. You got lucky, Rachel said. The timing is the one thing that works in your favor. Lucky, Daniel repeated, like the word was in a foreign language. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a nightmare with a silver lining. That's exactly what it is. Michael got up and made more coffee. Still terrible, he'd accepted this about himself, but nobody complained. The act of someone getting up and doing something small and practical in the middle of a catastrophe had its own kind of comfort. It said, the world is still functioning. People still make coffee. This will not kill you. When he came back, Daniel was looking at the folder again. Can I see the photograph? Rachel slid it across. Daniel looked at it for a long time. His face didn't collapse. He'd done whatever internal work was necessary to keep it from collapse, and Michael watched him do it and felt the particular ache of witnessing someone choose dignity in a moment when disintegration would have been completely justified. I've seen this restaurant, Daniel said. We drove past it once. She said she'd never been there. He set the photo down, face down, and pushed it back toward Rachel. She just said it, casually, like it was nothing. People who lie well have practiced lying, Rachel said. That doesn't reflect on you. It reflects on the fact that I didn't see it. Nobody sees what they're not looking for. I should have. Daniel. Michael sat back down. Stop. I need you to stop doing that. Daniel looked at him. There's a version of today where you spend hours telling yourself every way you failed, and every sign you missed, and every conversation you should have analyzed differently. And it's a version I'm not going to let you have. Not right now. You can't just she made choices. Consistent, deliberate, sustained choices to deceive you. That's hers. You can be angry about it. You can grieve it. You can feel whatever you need to feel about it. But you do not get to put her choices on yourself. Not in this room, not with me sitting here. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then the thing he'd been holding together started, at the edges, to come apart. Not dramatically. Nothing like the scenes in movies where someone breaks down completely. It was quieter than that, the way grief usually is when it's real. His eyes went red, and his jaw worked, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through it, slowly, deliberately. Like a man who has been through enough hard things to know that breathing is the only tool that works every single time. Michael didn't say anything. He put his hand on Daniel's shoulder and left it there. Rachel looked at her brother. Her expression was not pity. It was something much older and more complicated than pity. The specific sadness of someone watching a person they love hurt in a way they couldn't fully prevent, even with everything they'd done. I loved her, Daniel said, muffled behind his hand. I actually loved her. I know, Michael said. I wasn't performing it for anyone. I know, Daniel. I know, and the whole time Yeah, they sat there. Outside, somewhere on the street, someone was mowing a lawn. The steady mechanical drone of an ordinary Sunday. The world moving through its routines, while this room held something that had broken. Daniel left around 5 in the afternoon. He had the attorney's number in his phone, a plan for the next 72 hours, and Rachel's number, which he'd asked for himself, quietly, while Michael was rinsing mugs in the kitchen. Michael walked him to the door. At the threshold, Daniel turned back. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you." For he started again. "I know this wasn't easy to do." "It wasn't easy to not do," Michael said. "That was the harder part." Daniel looked at him. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled Michael into a hug. The kind of hug that meant something, both arms. The kind that lasted 4 seconds longer than casual. "I'll call you tomorrow," Daniel said. "I'll pick up on the first ring." Daniel nodded. He looked at Rachel over Michael's shoulder. "I'll call you too," he said. She pressed her lips together. "Okay. I mean it. I know you do." He left. Michael and Rachel stood in the hallway of his apartment and listened to his footsteps on the stairs. The exterior door opened, closed, then quiet. Rachel let out a long breath. The kind that carries everything that's been compressed over weeks of waiting and planning and holding. Michael turned to look at her. She looked, for the first time, genuinely exhausted. Not the controlled tiredness of the morning, something deeper, the depletion of a person who has carried something heavy over a great distance and has finally been allowed to set it down. "You okay?" he said. "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." "You want coffee?" "It's still terrible, but the offer stands." She almost smiled. "I should go." "You drove here from where?" "Boston. I flew in Friday." "Where are you staying?" "Hotel downtown." "Daniel's okay, Rachel. He's going to be okay." "I know." She picked up her bag. The folder went back inside it. All those pages of devastation, tucked away again with practiced efficiency. "He's stronger than he knows. He always has been. That runs in the family, from what I can tell." She looked at him. That expression again, the same one from the diner, from the party. The particular look of someone being accurately perceived and not knowing quite what to do about it. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking me if I was sure." "About any of it. You were sure. A lot of people would have. You're a professional. You had documentation. You'd had 3 weeks to question yourself before you walked into that party." He paused. "You didn't need me to do that for you." She studied him for a moment. "Daniel said you were a mechanic. I am a mechanic." "You don't talk like a mechanic." "What does a mechanic talk like?" "I don't mean." She shook her head slightly. "I meant it as a compliment." "Poorly executed." "I know you did." She moved toward the door. Stopped. Turned back once more, and there was something in it, not hesitation exactly. More like a calculation being made and then set aside. "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Sure, why did you go to the party?" "Daniel said you almost didn't come. He said he had to call you 3 times. Twice. He called twice." "Why did you almost not go?" Michael leaned against the doorframe. Because parties like that, rooms like that, they're not built for people like me. I know where I fit and I know where I don't. And I didn't see the point in standing around in a room where I don't fit, feeling like I don't fit. And yet Daniel needed me there. So Rachel looked at him. For what it's worth, she said carefully, you're the most fitting person in any room I've been in this weekend. And I was in a room full of people who spent a lot of money trying to be. She said it straightforwardly, without performance, and then clearly decided she'd said enough because she turned and went down the hallway, and he heard the same stairs that Daniel had taken, the same exterior door. He stood there. Then he went and picked up Eli from Mrs. Papadopoulos. The next 3 days were quiet in the way that the period between a storm and the news about is quiet. Daniel texted each morning. Brief, factual updates. Called the attorney. Meeting Thursday. Keeping the Wednesday dinner. Michael responded to each one with something equally short. Not because there was nothing to say, there was too much to say. But this was not the time for too much. Rachel texted once on Monday. He called me last night. We talked for 40 minutes. First time in 3 years. Michael read it twice. Then he wrote back, good. How are you? And she wrote, working on it. And that was enough. Eli, because he was 7, and their picked up frequencies, adults had long since stopped being able to hear, knew something was happening. He didn't ask directly. He was too smart for directly. Instead, he appeared at Michael's elbow on Monday evening, while Michael was standing at the kitchen window, not particularly looking at anything, and he said, Dad, do you want to play cards? Sure, bud. You're not listening. I'm listening. You have the face. What face? The face you get when you're thinking about something you can't fix yet. Michael looked down at his son, at the 7-year-old face that contained entirely too much perception. When did you get so smart? Mom was smart. You're smart. Math, Eli shrugged. You want to play Go Fish or War? War good, I always win war. You don't always win war. War is a game of pure chance. Winning or losing war is not a reflection of skill. And yet I always win. They played 4 rounds at the kitchen table. Eli won 3. Michael won 1, which Eli graciously attributed to luck. Afterward, Eli climbed into his bed, and Michael sat on the edge of it, and Eli said, without particular preamble, Dad, is Uncle Daniel okay? He's going through something hard right now. Is the wedding still happening? Michael paused. Not sure yet. Eli thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Vanessa didn't feel like the right person, he said finally. You only met her once. I know. But she didn't look at Uncle Daniel the way you looked at Mom in pictures. Michael was quiet for a moment. How did I look at Mom in pictures? Like she was the most important thing that was ever going to happen to you. Eli pulled the blanket up. Vanessa just looked like she was somewhere else. Michael sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after Eli's eyes closed. There were moments scattered, unpredictable, when his son said something that felt less like the observation of a child and more like a message from somewhere Michael couldn't identify. He'd stopped trying to categorize them. He just received them. Vanessa just looked like she was somewhere else. He thought about Rachel, standing at that party, still, watchful, holding information nobody else could see. He thought about how different it was to be free present in a room from simply being in it. Wednesday came. Daniel called at 11 in the morning, 2 hours before his dinner with Vanessa. I don't know how to do this, Daniel said. The words came fast, compressed. I've practiced what I want to say. I've written it down. I've said it out loud in my car this morning 3 times. And I still don't know how to sit across from her and. You don't have to confront her tonight, Michael said. The attorney said. I know what the attorney said. I'm not asking about legal strategy. I'm asking, he exhaled. I'm asking how you do it. How you sit across from someone and hold something that big and not. Daniel, you did it at the party. You stood there and shook her hand and toasted with us. How? Michael was quiet for a moment. He sat down. Because the alternative, he said slowly, was doing it in the wrong place at the wrong time, in front of the wrong people. and doing it wrong would have hurt you more. So I held it. How? I thought about you, about what you actually needed, which wasn't a scene at your engagement party. What you needed was the truth, delivered in a way you could actually absorb it. Daniel breathed. Tonight, Michael said, you're not confronting her. You're having dinner. You're a person going to dinner. That's the only job you have. What if she can tell something's wrong? What if she can? Then she'll be in the same position you've been in. She'll know something is coming and she won't know exactly what, and she'll have to sit with that. Which is considerably more than she deserves, considering. A short silence. That's almost ruthless, Daniel said. I've been spending time with your sister. Something that was almost a laugh. Small, fragile, real, Mike. What would I do without you? Let's not find out. I'll call you after. I'll be up. Doesn't matter how late. Daniel called at 10:47. Michael had put Eli to bed, done the dishes, tried to watch television, failed, and was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone on the table in front of him when it rang. How did it go? She knew, Daniel said, the second I sat down. She knew something was wrong. She kept asking me if everything was okay, and I kept saying yes, and she kept... He stopped. She's a good actress, Mike. She is genuinely good. What happened? Nothing happened. We ate dinner. We talked about nothing, and the whole time she was watching me like... He paused. Like someone waiting for a trap to close. Like she knew the room had changed, but couldn't find the door yet. Good, the attorney called this afternoon. He said to tell you Rachel was right about everything. The exposure, the timeline, all of it. He said if we'd been married for even 6 months, it would have been. Daniel's voice went quiet. It would have been bad. But you're not married. No, we're not, he exhaled. I'm going to call her tomorrow, Mike. I can't do another dinner like tonight. I need it to be over. The attorney has cleared it, he said, what I need to say and what not to say, and I can do it over the phone. He said to record it, which I never would have thought of, but apparently he stopped. Yeah, okay, Michael said, okay, call her tomorrow. Will you, can you? I'm here all day. Call me before and after. Before and after, Daniel repeated. Like a man repeating an itinerary so he doesn't forget where he's supposed to be. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah. It's almost over. The hardest part is almost over. A long silence on the line. It doesn't feel almost over. It never does from inside it. The call with Vanessa happened the next morning. Michael didn't hear it. He heard about it from Daniel afterward, in pieces, over the course of 2 separate phone calls and a long rambling text that came through at 2 in the afternoon. Vanessa had not admitted to Curtis Wade by name. She had not admitted to anything specific. She had cried genuinely, Daniel thought, or at least convincingly enough that he couldn't be certain, and she had said that she had made mistakes, and that she was sorry, and that she loved him. Daniel had said he had reason to believe the relationship wasn't what he'd understood it to be, and that he was ending the engagement, and that he wished her well. She'd asked if someone had told him something. He'd said he'd rather not discuss sources. She'd gone silent for a moment that Daniel described as one of the longest of his life. And then she'd said, I hope you find someone who deserves you. Was it real? Michael asked. When she said that? I think so, Daniel said. I think at the end there, for about 30 seconds, she was actually being real. And that's the worst part. Because if she was capable of being real, then she chose not to be. Every single day for 8 months, she chose not to be. I know, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it today. When does it get easier? Slowly, Michael said. Not in a straight line. But it does. He wasn't talking only about Daniel and Vanessa. They both knew that. Daniel had stood at Sarah's funeral. He knew exactly what kind of experience Michael was drawing from. Okay, Daniel said. Okay. That evening, Rachel called. Not a text, an actual call, which Michael had already learned, was not her default mode. He called me, she said. About an hour ago. How was he? Sad, relieved. Some combination that doesn't have a clean name. She paused. He cried. He doesn't know that I could tell, but I could tell. That's okay. I know. Another pause. It was good to hear his voice. Even like that, even with all of it, 3 years is a long time. Too long. Michael carried the phone to the kitchen window. The street outside was settling into evening, the light going orange and long, the neighborhood making the particular sounds of families returning to themselves after the day. Rachel? He said it, and then wasn't immediately sure what he meant to follow it with. Yeah. How long are you in town? A beat. I have a flight Sunday. That's 4 days. It is. You should see where you grew up. Since you're here, Michael. Not as a date. Not as anything. I'm just saying, you grew up 2 streets from where I live, and if you've spent 3 years in Boston, you probably haven't walked those streets in a while. Silence. There's a decent taco truck on Clement Street on Saturdays, he added. Eli has strong opinions about the carnitas. He would probably share those opinions with you, if you were within earshot. Another beat. Longer. Eli is your son, 7 years old. He wins at war, even though war is a game of pure chance. It's not pure chance. There's strategy in when you decide to go to war when you have equal cards. That's, Michael stopped. I've never thought about that. I'll explain it to him. If I'm in earshot. Something settled quietly in Michael's chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time, not excitement. Exactly. Smaller than that. Gentler. The specific feeling of a door that hadn't been opened in years moving slightly on its hinges. Saturday, he said. 10 o'clock. Clement Street. I'll find it. It's a green truck. You can't miss it. Okay. She hung up. Michael put the phone on the counter and stood at the window for another minute. Then he went down the hall to Eli's room. Eli was building something with Legos on his bedroom floor, some structure of indeterminate purpose that sprawled across half the room. Dad, don't step on the east wing. It's important. It's decorative. Michael stopped. What do you know about decorative east wings? Nothing. I just like how it sounds. Michael leaned against the doorframe and watched his son fit 2 small pieces together with the careful precision of a person who took seriously whatever he was doing, however small. Buddy, he said. Yeah? Saturday morning. We're meeting someone for tacos. Eli looked up. A friend. Her name is Rachel. Is she nice? Michael considered this question with genuine attention. She's honest, he said. Which is better. Eli considered this in turn. Is she the face? What? The face you've been making. This week. Is she part of the face? Michael looked at his son for a long moment. I don't know yet, he said, but maybe. Eli nodded. Looked back at his Legos. Fitted another piece. Okay, he said, like it was simple. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'll wear my good shirt. Michael stood in the doorway a little longer than he needed to. Outside the window, the last of the evening light was pulling itself off the rooftops, and the neighborhood was going quiet in the way it always did, the particular settling sound of a day completing itself, making room for whatever came next. He had not asked for any of this. He had almost not gone to that party. He had sat in a parking lot in a truck with a useless air freshener and almost turned around and gone home. He had walked into a room where he didn't belong and stood at the edges and watched. And somehow, in the middle of everything falling apart, something had shifted. Not fixed, not resolved, not neat, just shifted, like a door moving on hinges that were rusty from long disuse, slow, effortful, uncertain. But moving. He pushed off the doorframe. Don't stay up too late with the east wing, he said. 20 more minutes, 15, 18, deal. He went back to the kitchen and stood at the window one more time. Thought about Daniel, somewhere across the city, beginning the long quiet work of rebuilding a life that had been renovated by the truth. Thought about Rachel in a hotel downtown, 3 years of distance, slowly becoming something with a different shape. Thought about Eli, fitting pieces together on the floor of his room with absolute certainty that they would eventually form something. Thought about Sarah, and the way she had always told him that the people who mattered would find their way to the table, that he didn't have to go looking, he just had to leave the door unlocked. He hadn't believed that in a long time. He was starting to think, standing at his kitchen window on an ordinary Thursday evening, that he might have been wrong about that. Not certain, just starting to think. Saturday came the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement, slipping in through the side door while Michael was busy making breakfast and not thinking about it too hard. Eli was up at 7, which was early even for him, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway fully dressed jeans. A blue button-down that he had clearly ironed himself based on the diagonal crease running across the front pocket, and announced that he was ready. "We don't leave for 3 hours. I know, I'm ready early." You ironed your shirt, Eli." "Dad, you said wear the good shirt. I'm wearing the good shirt." He climbed onto a kitchen stool and picked up a piece of toast from the plate Michael had just made. "Are you nervous?" "No, you made coffee twice. The first one was too weak." "You poured it out after one sip. It was too weak." Eli ate his toast and studied his bad father with the forensic patience of a child who has learned that waiting is more effective than pressing. Michael poured himself the second coffee and drank it standing at the counter, and tried to remember the last time he'd been nervous about meeting someone. Actually nervous. The low-frequency hum in the chest that wasn't quite dread and excitement and quite start, but lived in the territory between them. He couldn't remember, which was in itself information. Rachel was already at the taco truck when they arrived. She was standing to one side of the small line that had formed, not on her phone, not doing anything, just standing, watching the street with that quality of attention he'd noticed the first night. The stillness that wasn't emptiness, the particular alertness of someone who was always, on some level, taking inventory of the room. She was dressed differently than the party, differently than the diner. Jeans, a light jacket, hair down instead of pulled back. She looked like a person on a Saturday morning rather than a person managing a situation, and the difference was significant. Eli saw her first. He looked up at Michael, then back at Rachel, then back at Michael, with an expression of rapid private calculation. "Is that her?" "That's her. She looks nice. I told you she was." "You said honest. But she also looks nice." He considered this like it was relevant data. Both can be true. Michael kept walking. Rachel spotted them, and something in her face shifted, not quite a smile, not yet, but the preparation for one. The way a face makes room for something before it arrives. She looked at Eli first. "You must be the war strategist," she said. Eli stopped, looked up at his father, looked back at Rachel. "He told you about war? He told me you always win." "I always win. Your dad thinks it's luck. My dad is wrong. There's strategy in the war cards when you have a tie. You choose how many cards to flip, and if you know your distribution mines. You track your distribution. In my head. Loosely." Rachel crouched down slightly, not in a condescending way, in the way of someone who takes the conversation seriously enough to be at eye level for it. "How loose? Like I know if I've seen a lot of high cards come out already. The odds shift. So I adjust. That's not loose. That's Bayesian reasoning." Eli frowned. "What's Bayesian?" "It means you update what you believe based on new evidence as you get it, instead of just going with your first guess." A pause. "That's what I do," Eli said slowly. "I just didn't know it had a name. Most good things have names. People just don't always tell kids the names." Eli processed this. Then he turned to Michael with an expression of complete vindication. "See," he said. "I see," Michael said. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Eli accepted this with the magnanimity of someone who has made his point and has no need to press it further. He turned back toward the taco truck and studied the handwritten menu board with great seriousness. Michael looked at Rachel. She straightened up and looked back at him. "He's extraordinary," she said quietly, not performing the compliment. Just stating it. Einhau. Mostly just trying not to get in his way. She almost smiled. "That's more self-aware than 90% of parents I've encountered." "How many parents have you encountered?" "Professionally? Quite a few. People's financial decisions are almost never just about money." She paused. "They're about what they're afraid of losing. Children change that calculus entirely. The line moved. They moved with it. They ate standing at one of the tall tables near the truck, 3 orders of carnitas tacos. Because Eli had been decisive on that point from the beginning, and neither adult had seen a reason to argue, and the conversation moved the way conversations do when nobody is forcing it, sideways, circling, landing on unexpected things. Rachel told Eli about growing up 2 streets away, and Eli wanted to know what it was like, and she described the neighborhood as it had been 15 years ago, smaller, noisier, the bakery on the corner that was now a phone repair shop, the elementary school that still had the same broken water fountain it had apparently had for decades. "Do you miss it?" Eli asked. "Living here sometimes." "Why did you leave, Eli?" Michael said. "It's fine," Rachel said. She looked at Eli. "I left because something happened and it felt easier to be somewhere else." But easier and better aren't always the same thing. Eli thought about this while he ate. "My dad does that sometimes," he said. "Like he stays busy because it's easier than being sad. But the sad is still there." The table went quiet. Michael looked at his son. Rachel looked at Michael. Neither of them said anything for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. "You're right," Michael said finally. "That's exactly right." Eli shrugged, like this was obvious, and reached for his 3rd taco. When Eli spotted a kid from his class across the street and asked if he could go say hi with the particular vibrating urgencies of a 7-year-old who has been patient long enough and needs to be released into the wild, Michael said, "Yes. Stay on the sidewalk," and they were suddenly alone at the tall table. The shift was subtle, not uncomfortable. Just different, the conversation, recalibrating around the absence of a small person who had been carrying most of its weight. "He's good at that," Rachel said, saying the true thing. "He gets it from his mother. Tell me about her." Michael looked at her. Nobody asked that directly. People who knew Sarah's story, which in his world was most people, treated the subject with the careful choreography of someone navigating around a wound. They referred to her obliquely, past tense, with a particular tone of voice that meant "I'm being respectful" and also meant "please, don't make me say anything wrong." Rachel asked, like it was a simple question, like Sarah was a person worth knowing about, rather than a subject requiring management. "Sarah was a kindergarten teacher," Michael said. "She had this theory that most of what kids needed to learn was already in them. Her job was to give them enough space, enough safety that it could come out. She was like that with everyone, actually, not just kids. Eli inherited it, in every possible way." He paused. "She died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to it was 7 months. 7 months is so fast it was." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "She handled it better than I did. She was the one who kept telling me it would be okay." Which was the person dying, kept telling the person staying behind that it would be okay. That was Sarah. Rachel was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. And then she didn't add anything to it, which was the right choice. The people who added things, "She sounds incredible. She's watching over you. Everything happens for a reason," they meant well, every one of them. But the additions always landed like small corrections, like the grief as stated needed editing. Rachel just left it. Michael appreciated that more than he could have explained. "What about you?" he said. "Relationships. That's a direct pivot." "You asked me." Seemed fair. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "There was someone in Boston. For 2 years. He was a good person. We were well matched on paper, same field, similar values, compatible schedules." She paused. "I ended it 8 months ago." "Why?" "Because compatible and right aren't the same thing. And I realized I was staying because leaving felt like admitting that something else wasn't working. That the distance from here, from Daniel, from all of it wasn't actually solving anything. It was just relocating it. Did leaving help? I'm here, aren't I?" He looked at her. "I don't mean it like that," she said. "I mean, I came back for Daniel." "That's true. But I also came back because Boston stopped feeling like it had anything in it that I couldn't leave. And that's not a good sign. When you can leave everything without it costing you anything." No, Michael agreed, it's not. Across the street, Eli was talking to his classmate with enormous animation, both hands moving, clearly deep in a topic of great importance. Baseball, probably. Or the Lego East Wing. It was difficult to tell from this distance. Can I ask you something? Rachel said. You've been doing that all morning without asking. This one's different. She looked at him steadily. The party. After I told you about Daniel. About Vanessa. About all of it. She paused. You didn't hesitate. You just said yes. Immediately. Why? You didn't know me. You had no reason to trust what I was saying. I could have been, I don't know. Wrong. Biased. Trying to sabotage something for my own reasons. But you weren't. You didn't know that at the party. Michael thought about how to answer this. He looked at the street, at Eli, at the ordinary Saturday teaching moving around them. When Sarah was sick, he said slowly, there was a doctor. Her primary oncologist. And on the day he told us what the scans showed, the first round of scans, after diagnosis he came in, and he sat down, and before he said anything, he looked at Sarah, and he looked at me, and he took a breath. And in that breath I knew exactly what he was going to say before he said a word. Rachel waited. It was in how much it was costing him. To be there. To have to say it. You could see it on his face. This is a profession where he has to do this regularly, and it still costs him something every single time. He paused. Some people, when they're about to tell you something hard, you can see that it's hard for them, too. Not because they're dramatic about it, just because they're human enough that truth has a weight. He looked at her. You had that. At the party. The second you started talking. I could see what carrying this had cost you. He paused. People who are lying, or who have an angle, they're lighter. The lie makes them lighter, because they're not actually carrying the thing. You were carrying it. Rachel was very still. So I trusted you, he said. Not blindly, but enough. She looked at him for a long moment. The particular look he'd been cataloging over the past week, the one where she was deciding what to do with being accurately seen. I don't know what to do with you, she said, quietly. Honestly, you don't have to do anything with me. We're just eating tacos. Michael, he held her. I know. Eli came back from across the street with the energy of someone who has been fully recharged by social interaction, and the conversation shifted back into lighter territory. Eli's school, Rachel's work in abstract terms. A disagreement about the best month of the year that somehow became quite heated, with Michael taking May and Rachel taking October, and Eli declaring firmly for December because of Christmas and refusing to consider any counter-arguments. December is objectively compromised by self-interest, Rachel told him. Everything is compromised by self-interest, Eli said. You just told me that. Bayesian stuff. You work with what you have. Rachel stared at him. He used your argument against you, Michael said. I heard. He does that, noted. She was looking at Eli with an expression Michael had not seen on her face before, openly delighted. Not performed. Not managed. Just there, uncalculated. The way delight is when it arrives without permission. And Eli, who was 7 and perceptive, and had his mother's instincts, saw it too. He looked at Rachel, and then at his father, and then back at Rachel, and something settled in his expression, some quiet, private decision. And he picked up the last piece of his taco and said, completely casually, you should come see the Lego thing. I'm building a city. It has an east wing. Decorative? Structurally necessary and decorative. Rachel looked at Michael. He raised both hands slightly. Your call. Okay, she said. I'd like to see it. Daniel called while they were walking back to Michael's building. Michael stepped slightly ahead, out of easy earshot, and answered. How are you, surviving? Daniel's voice had a texture to it, not broken exactly, but worn thin. The attorney talked to Richard Harrington's people this morning. Already? Apparently they were expecting contact. The Harrington family, they're not stupid, Mike. They knew Daniel ending the engagement so fast, so cleanly, meant someone had talked. A pause. They're not going to fight it. They can't afford the attention right now. That's good. Yeah, he breathed. I got a text from Vanessa last night. I didn't open it. The attorney said I don't have to respond, so. Then don't. I want to. That's the problem. His voice went quieter. I want to open it and have it say something that explains it. Something that makes it make sense. Because right now I keep running through 8 months in my head and trying to find the places where I should have known, and I can't find them, and I can't figure out if that means I was stupid, or if it means she was just Daniel. Really that good at it. She was really that good at it. That's the answer. That's the whole answer. Silence. Okay. The text will not explain it. It will not make it make sense. Nothing she says will give you the thing you're looking for, because the thing you're looking for doesn't exist. There is no explanation that will make 8 months of deliberate deception feel logical. So don't open it. A long pause. When did you get ruthless? I've been spending time with your sister. A sound half exhale, half something that wanted to be a laugh and was working toward it. How is she? Michael glanced back. Rachel and Eli were walking side by side, and Eli was explaining something with both hands, and Rachel was listening with her full attention. She's good, Michael said. She's really good, Daniel. Tell her. He stopped. Tell her I'll call her tonight. Will you tell her that? Tell her yourself. You have her number. I know. Call her tonight, Daniel. You don't need me in the middle of it. Another pause. Then yeah, you're right, I know. You're very confident lately. I've had a good week, considering. Daniel made the sound again, the one working toward a laugh. Thank you, Mike. For all of it. Stop thanking me. I will when it stops being appropriate. Go do something today. Go outside. Don't sit in your apartment and run the tape. What should I do? I don't know. Go to a hardware store. Walk around a hardware store for an hour. That's what I do when I need to think about something other than what I'm thinking about. That is the most specific and strange advice. It works. The smell of lumber is very grounding. I'll try it. Call your sister tonight, I will. He hung up. He turned back. Rachel and Eli were waiting for him. Everything okay? Rachel asked. He's going to call you tonight. Something moved across her face. Brief and complicated and private. Okay, she said. He's going to be okay. He just needs time to stop trying to solve it and start letting it be unsolvable. That's not easy for him. It's not easy for anyone. She nodded. They kept walking. Eli had moved between them at some point, not deliberately, just naturally, taking the middle position as though it was the obvious place to be. And his small presence between them, moving down the sidewalk, had a quality to it that Michael didn't let himself analyze too carefully. Some things you just walk through. The Lego City was, by any measure, an achievement. It covered most of Eli's bedroom floor and contained what appeared to be residential neighborhoods, a commercial district, a fire station of debatable structural integrity, and the East Wing, which Eli described as a cultural center along with an elaborate road system built from every straight Lego piece he owned, plus several that were clearly structural elements repurposed against their design. Rachel stood in the doorway and looked at it. You built all of this yourself? My dad helped with the road system. He's good at the boring parts. The boring parts are actually the most important parts. That's what he says. He's right. Eli looked at his father with an expression that conveyed, see, strategy, I knew. I always know. Rachel crouched at the doorway, not stepping in, respecting the architecture, and studied the city with genuine focus. What's this building? She pointed. The courthouse. It's also a library, because I didn't have enough pieces for 2 separate buildings. Efficient use of resources. You've got to work with what you have. Who taught you that? Nobody. I just figured it out. He paused. Maybe my dad. Rachel looked up at Michael. Michael leaned against the doorframe and said nothing, because nothing was required. What happens in your city? Rachel asked Eli. What do you mean? Every city has a story. What's the story of yours? Eli considered this with complete seriousness. People live there, he said finally. And sometimes things go wrong, and then people help each other fix the things that went wrong. And then more things go wrong. And then more people help. The room was quiet. That's a good city, Rachel said. It's the only kind of city that makes sense, Eli said. If nothing ever went wrong, you wouldn't need anyone else. Michael looked at the ceiling briefly. Sarah, in every word. In the specific logic of it, the generosity underneath it. The way his son had processed 7 years of watching his father need people and be needed in return, and had arrived at this philosophy entirely on his own, and stated it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Eli, Rachel said, can I show you something? What? I want to show you how to reinforce this intersection. She pointed to a spot in the road system. It's going to fail at that joint. You need a different connector. Eli looked at the intersection, looked at Rachel. How do you know? I work with structures, financial ones, not physical ones. But the principle is the same. Any point where two different systems meet is the point most likely to fail. You have to reinforce the junction. Junction, Eli repeated, like he was cataloging the word. May I? Yeah, but take your shoes off. It's a respect thing. Rachel looked at Michael. Don't look at me, Michael said. His city, his rules. She took her shoes off. She sat on the floor. And for the next 40 minutes, Rachel Reyes, compliance auditor, daughter of a landscaper, strange sister, making her way back, sat on the floor of a 7-year-old's bedroom and reinforced junctions in a Lego city, while Eli watched with the focused attention of a student who has found a teacher worth listening to. Michael sat in the doorway and watched. He thought about what Eli had said. Sometimes things go wrong, and then people help each other fix the things that went wrong. He thought about a parking lot outside a mansion, a folder on a passenger seat. 11 minutes of sitting with the engine off. He thought about Rachel standing still in a room full of movement, holding something heavy, and waiting for the right person to help her put it down. He thought about Sarah, who would have taken one look at this scene at his son and this woman on the floor of his bedroom, and given him the look. The one that said, "Do you see this? Are you paying attention?" He was paying attention. He was paying very close attention. Rachel stayed for dinner. This was not planned. It emerged the way unplanned things do, Eli declared, without particular fanfare, that he was hungry, and asked what was for dinner. Michael said he was making pasta, and Eli's turned to Rachel and said, "Do you like pasta?" With the tone of someone for whom a yes would clearly resolve a question he'd been turning over. She said yes. Eli said good and went to wash his hands as though the matter was settled, which it apparently was. Michael stood in the kitchen and started water boiling, and Rachel appeared in the doorway and said, "Can I help?" And he said, "You can make the salad if you want." And she said, "I make a good salad." And he said, "Confident." And she said, "Accurate." They worked in the kitchen without talking very much, and the not talking was comfortable in the specific way that comfortable silence is not empty, not avoiding, just two people who didn't need to fill the space between them with noise. Eli appeared periodically with updates on the Lego City reconstruction and questions about dinner timing, and one extended digression about whether pasta technically counted as Italian or had become American through cultural adoption, which Rachel engaged with completely seriously for 4 full minutes before Michael intervened and said the water was boiling. "He argues like you," Michael told her when Eli disappeared again. "Like me? He has a position, and he has a reason for the position, and he doesn't let go of the reason even when he moves on to the next thing. Is that a flaw? No, it's he stirred the pasta. It's actually extremely useful to be around. When you know someone has a reason for what they think, you can trust what they think. Even when you disagree." Rachel was quiet. "Most people I've worked with," she said slowly, "treat having a reason as optional. Like the opinion is the important part, and the reasoning is just decoration. Most people I've worked with treat a car like it's magic, and they're surprised when it breaks." He paused. "Everything has reasons. Cars, people, systems. Ignoring the reasons doesn't make them go away." "No," she agreed. "It just makes the breakdown more surprising." Eli appeared in the doorway. "Are you talking about cars or people?" "Both," Michael said. "That makes sense. They're basically the same. They need maintenance, and they break down if you ignore them. He looked at the pot. Is it ready? 2 minutes. I'll set the table. He disappeared. Michael and Rachel looked at each other in the brief quiet of a kitchen doing its ordinary work. Michael, she said it carefully, deliberately. Yeah. I go back to Boston Sunday. I know, I'm thinking about not going back. Permanently. She kept her eyes on the salad she was finishing. I have options. There's a position here with a firm I've consulted for. I've been thinking about it for a while. Since before this week. She paused. This week didn't create the thought. It just made it harder to argue against. Michael put a lid on the pasta. Rachel, I'm not saying it because of you, she said quickly. I want to be clear about that. Daniel is here. The possibility of being near my family again. Those are real reasons that have nothing to do with maintenance. Rachel? She stopped. I know, he said. I know they're real reasons. And I know this week didn't create the thought. He turned to look at her. And I also know that when a door has been closed for a long time and someone holds it open just slightly, it gets easier to walk through. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. I'm not in a position to ask you anything. We've known each other a week. But I am saying, he paused, I am saying that whatever you decide, the door here is not closing. The pasta boiled. Eli called from the dining room that he'd set the table and could someone please bring the salad. Rachel picked up the salad bowl. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. But the way she said it, the weight of it, the particular quality of a word being used to carry more than its surface meaning, told him everything he needed to know. After dinner, Eli fell asleep on the couch within 20 minutes of finishing his last bite because 7-year-olds are small and efficient with their energy and they run at full capacity until they simply don't anymore. Michael carried him to bed, pulled the blanket up, stood in the doorway. When he came back to the living room, Rachel was standing at the window, looking at the street, the same quality of stillness he'd noticed at the party but different now. Not watchful, not working, just present. He's out, Michael said. He held on longer than I expected. He was trying to stay up. He does that when he doesn't want something to be over. She turned from the window. The room was quiet, the ordinary after-dinner quiet of a home settling around the end of something. I should go, she said. You probably should. Neither of them moved for a moment. This was a good day, Rachel said. I didn't expect it to be. I came here for Daniel. I came to fix something. I didn't expect. She stopped. To fix something else? To find something. She corrected herself gently. That's different. He walked her to the door. At the threshold, she stopped and turned, and they were close the way you get close in doorways without intending to. And she looked at him with the expression he'd come to recognize, the one where she was deciding what to do with being seen, and this time she didn't look away. Sunday, she said. Before I fly, if you're not doing anything. I'm not doing anything Sunday, Eli. Mrs. Papadopoulos would consider a Sunday visit a gift. Then Sunday. She nodded. Like it was a plan. Like it was something solid. Good night, Michael. Good night, Rachel. She went down the hall. He heard the stairs. The exterior door. He stood at the closed door of his apartment for a moment. Then he went to the window, the same window, the kitchen window, his thinking place. And he looked at the street below and watched her walk to her car. And she moved with the same deliberate quality she brought to everything. And she did not look back up at the window. But just before she got in the car, she stopped, tilted her face up at the sky for just a second. A single breath visible in the cold air. Then she got in the car and drove away. Michael stood at the window. He thought about Daniel, probably in his apartment tonight, probably finally allowing himself to stop running the tape. Hopefully having called his sister. Hopefully having gone to a hardware store and smelled some lumber and let the ordinary world do what ordinary worlds do. He thought about Eli. Sleep down the hall with his Lego city reinforced at the junctions, which was all any of them were really doing. reinforcing the junctions, making sure the place where two different systems met could hold the weight of what passed through it. He thought about Sunday. He turned off the kitchen light. The apartment went quiet, and in the quiet, for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, Michael Carter did not feel like a man standing at the edge of someone else's room. He felt like a man standing at the threshold of his own. Sunday came with fog, the kind that sat low over the neighborhood and made everything feel close and muffled and private, like the city was giving them permission to exist in a smaller radius than usual. Michael made coffee properly this time, having watched a YouTube tutorial on Saturday night, with more focus than he'd given most things in recent memory, and drank it at the kitchen window, and thought about nothing in particular, which was unusual for him, and felt itself like progress. Rachel texted at 8:47. "Still on for this morning?" He wrote back, "Yes. Coffee's ready," a pause. "Then I haven't said I'm coming to your apartment." "I know. But the coffee's ready anyway." Another pause. "Longer, I'll be there at 10. He smiled at his phone. Put it face down on the counter. Drank his coffee. She arrived at 10:05 with a paper bag from the bakery, 2 blocks over the one that had replaced the one she'd grown up near, which she'd found by walking the neighborhood that morning, she said. Because she'd woken up early and couldn't stay in the hotel room any longer. "How was it?" Michael asked, walking around. "Smaller than I remembered." "And exactly the same." She set the bag on the counter. "There's a house on Mariposa Street, yellow. Used to be green when I was a kid. The family painted it. Sometime in the last 15 years. I stood in front of it for probably 4 minutes. Why? Because the summer I was 12, I fell off my bike in front of that house, and a woman came out and put a Band-Aid on my knee and gave me a glass of water and didn't ask me any questions about why I was riding my bike alone or where my parents were. She just helped." She paused. "I've thought about that woman probably 100 times over the years. The particular grace of helping someone without needing to understand them first." Michael looked at her. "The house was yellow," she said. "But the garden was the same. Same roses along the fence. Whoever lives there now kept the roses. That's something." "Yeah." She looked at the paper bag. "I got croissants. I didn't know if Eli is at Mrs. Papadopoulos." "Right." She nodded. "So, just us. Just us." The fog pressed at the kitchen window. "Okay," Rachel said. She didn't move toward the door or away from it. She just stood at the counter with her jacket still on and looked at Michael with an expression that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite achieving it. "Rachel, I've been thinking about Boston, about Boston, about the position here." She pressed her lips together briefly. "About the fact that I haven't made a decision primarily based on what I actually wanted in a very long time. I make decisions based on what's defensible, what's logical, what makes sense on a document. And this one doesn't make sense on a document." She looked at him directly. "I've known you for 8 days. I came here for my brother. The professional opportunity is real, but it's been sitting on the table for 4 months, and I've been telling myself I needed more time to evaluate it. What changed? I stopped needing it to make sense on a document." Michael put his coffee mug down. "I need to say something to you," he said. "And I need you to let me say it without calculating it. Just hear it." She waited. "I am a 32-year-old mechanic who lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with a 7-year-old and a coffee machine he still doesn't fully understand. I work long hours and I'm not always good at talking about hard things, even when I know they need to be said. I have a lot of..." He paused. "There's a lot of grief still in this apartment. In my life. Not the kind that breaks things anymore, but the kind that's become part of the structure. You'd be walking into something that has history in its walls." She hadn't moved. "I'm also someone who will tell you the truth. Who will show up when it costs me something to show up. He stopped again. "Who is better than I was 2 years ago and worse than I'm going to be, and I think that's all any of us can honestly say." The kitchen was very quiet. "I know about history and walls," Rachel said. "I know you do. I spent 3 years in an apartment in Boston that I kept very clean and very organized because empty space made me nervous. She took her jacket off finally, draped it over a chair. I know what it means to have grief as part of the structure. I grew up in a family where something was always half unsaid. I'm not afraid of complicated, Michael. What are you afraid of? She considered the question genuinely. Choosing wrong again, she said. Choosing someone who looks like the right decision and turning out to be the kind of person who prioritizes being right over being there. She paused. The man in Boston was very good at being right. I'm wrong regularly. Ask Eli about the war strategy. Something unlocked in her face. Not quite a smile. The thing that comes before a smile when the decision to let one happen hasn't fully been made, but is no longer being actively resisted. I'm going to call the firm Monday, she said, about the position. Okay, I'm not saying that because of Rachel, I need you to know it's not. I know it's not only because of me. I also know it's not because of me, and both of those things are fine. He held her gaze. You don't have to make it make sense on a document. She looked at him. Okay, she said, quietly, the word doing the work it had done on Friday night, carrying more than its surface. Okay, he said back. They ate croissants at the kitchen table and drank coffee and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Daniel or Vanessa or the last 8 days about the job Rachel had taken straight out of college and hated for 3 years. Before, she found compliance work, about the year Michael had spent ere Sarah's diagnosis trying to fix everything in the apartment because the apartment was the only thing he could fix. About Eli's theory regarding December and the sound philosophy of working with what you have. At some point, the fog lifted, the way fog does not dramatically, just gradually, until you realize the light has changed, and you're not sure exactly when it happened. Rachel noticed it first. It cleared, she said. Michael looked at the window. It does that. I forgot how fast the fog moves here. Boston fog sits, it commits. California fog is non-committal. It shows up, hangs around for a while, leaves, when something better comes along. That's actually an accurate description of several people I've worked with. Fog as personality type. There's a presentation in that. I'm not giving it, but there's a presentation. Michael laughed. Actually laughed, the kind that happens before you decide to, the kind that is entirely its own decision. Rachel looked at him when he laughed, openly, the way she looked at things she found worth studying. What, he said. Nothing, you don't laugh enough. I laugh. Not like that. He looked at her. How do I laugh usually? Carefully. Like you're checking first whether the laugh is appropriate. She turned her coffee cup slowly. That one wasn't careful. Is that good or bad? Definitely good. She stood up, carried her plate to the sink. I should let you have your Sunday. You gave up your morning for a person you've known for 8 days, and you haven't complained once. Gave up my morning voluntarily for someone I was glad to see. That's not a sacrifice. She turned from the sink. You say things like that very simply, like they're not significant. They're not. It's just true. That's exactly what I mean. She dried her hands on the dish towel. The man in Boston, everything was significant. Everything had weight attached to it. Every kind gesture had a ledger entry somewhere. I did this for you, therefore. You just stop. You just mean it. I do. She looked at him for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen, and she kissed him. Not tentatively. Not the exploratory kind. The kind that has been considered from several angles and decided on. Brief and deliberate, and when she stepped back, she looked at him with the clear eyes of someone who has done the calculation and is at peace with the answer. I've been thinking about doing that since Thursday, she said. The taco truck. The taco truck. She paused. Possibly the diner. I'm backdating it. That's allowed. Good. She picked up her jacket. I have a flight at 4. I know, I'll call you when I land. Okay, and I'll call the firm Monday. And Michael, she stopped at the kitchen doorway. Don't tell Daniel yet about any of this. He has enough to process. I wasn't planning to. He's going to have opinions. He's going to be insufferable about it. He really is. Something warm moved through her expression. He's also going to be happy, eventually, when he's done being insufferable. I know, Michael paused. Call me when you land. You already said that. I know. I'm saying it again. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she left. He stood at the kitchen window, his thinking place, and watched the street below, and this time she did look up. Brief, direct, no performance in it, just a look and a nod, and then she was gone around the corner. Michael picked up his coffee. It had gone cold while they were talking. He drank it anyway. She called at 7:43 that evening. He was at the kitchen table helping Eli with a math worksheet multiplication, which Eli had theoretically mastered, but apparently needed to negotiate with individually each time. He picked up on the second ring. You landed. I landed. It's cold here. It was 62 in your neighborhood this morning. It's almost always 62 in my neighborhood. That's unreasonable. Weather should have range. Take it up with the geography. In the background, he could hear the particular ambient noise of an airport announcement systems, rolling luggage, the low murmur of 1,000 separate conversations. Michael, thank you. For the weekend. For all of it. You don't have to thank me for any of it. I know. I want to. Eli looked up from his worksheet and mouthed Rachel. Michael nodded. Eli's expression to that thing again. The private calculation, the quiet settling. He looked back down at his worksheet. Call the firm tomorrow, Michael said into the phone. I will. And sleep. It's been a significant week. Significant is one word for it. Get some rest. You too. A pause. Good night, Michael. Good night, Rachel. He put the phone down. Eli was looking at him. She going to move here? Eli asked. She's thinking about it. Eli nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. Good, he said. She fixed the East Wing junction. He looked back down at his math. People who fix junctions should stay. Michael sat with that for a moment. Then he pulled the worksheet back toward him and said 7 times 8. 56. You knew that one. I know all of them. I'd just like to check. 3 weeks passed. They were not dramatic weeks. They were the kind of weeks that do their work quietly, the kind that rearrange the furniture of a life without announcing what they're doing until you look up one day and notice that everything is in a different place. Daniel called Michael every 2 or 3 days. The calls got gradually longer and gradually less about Vanessa, which was its own kind of progress, the way you gauge the healing of something not by the absence of pain, but by the increasing stretch between mentions of it. He'd spoken to his attorney twice more. The Harrington family had made no contact. Vanessa's text, still unopened, sat in his phone like a door he was deciding whether to walk through. Open it or delete it, Michael told him on one of those calls. But don't leave it there. It's taking up space. What if it says something that... It won't say anything that changes what happened. I know, then open it or delete it. On your timeline. But make a choice. 3 days later, Daniel texted, deleted it. Michael texted back, good man. Daniel and Rachel talked every few days. Michael knew this because Rachel mentioned it and because Daniel mentioned it, separately, in their own conversations, both of them reporting back to him, as though he were the junction point between them, which he supposed in some sense he was. He didn't mind. Junctions were important. He'd learned that from his son. Rachel called the firm on Monday. They offered her the position on Wednesday. She asked for a week to finalize details. She called Michael that Wednesday evening. They want me to start in 6 weeks, she said, which means finding an apartment, which means... There's 2 buildings from mine, Michael said. It's been empty for a month. I've been watching it. A silence. You've been watching it. Just in case. Michael Carter. It's a practical observation. It doesn't mean anything it doesn't mean. It means something. Maybe a little. She laughed. He'd heard her laugh before the controlled version, the polite version. This one was unguarded, short and real and completely itself. Send me the listing, she said. Already in your texts. Another pause. Longer. You sent it before I called. I sent it when they called you, Wednesday morning. You called me Wednesday evening. I had time. You were sure I'd take it. I was hopeful you'd take it. Different thing. Is it? Hope means the outcome matters to you. Sure means you've stopped accounting for the possibility that it won't go your way. He paused. I don't stop accounting for possibilities. Mechanics don't. You find out what you hope for, and then you prepare for what might actually happen. And what were you prepared for? If I didn't take it. He thought about it. I was prepared to be genuinely glad you made the choice that was right for you. And quietly sorry about the junction. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I'm taking the apartment, she said. And the job. A beat. Not in that order, but yes to both. Okay, he could hear her smile in it. Send me the landlord's number. Already in your texts. Daniel found out 3 weeks later. Not from Michael. Not from Rachel. From Mrs. Papadopoulos, which was in retrospect entirely predictable. Daniel had stopped by on a Sunday afternoon to see Michael, found him not home, knocked on Mrs. Papadopoulos's door to ask if she knew where he was, and Mrs. Papadopoulos, who considered information a gift meant to be given freely, had said, "Oh, he's helping Rachel move boxes. Did you know she's living on the block now? Lovely woman. Very good with children. The little one absolutely adores her." Daniel had called Michael immediately. Michael picked up to hear Mrs. Papadopoulos. I know. You were going to tell me. I was waiting for the right moment. Michael, you had a lot going on. Michael, how did she phrase it? Lovely woman. Very good with children. A long silence. You like her, Daniel said. Not an accusation. Something more complicated, surprise, and then the rapid processing of surprise into something else. Yes, my sister. Your sister Rachel. Daniel. I know her name. Another silence. When? Daniel asked. When what? When did how long has this? 8 days in, approximately. 8? He stopped. You knew her for 8 days and you. I knew her for 8 days, and I noticed that something was happening that I didn't plan for, and I didn't act on it until she did because... She acted first, Daniel? Rachel acted first? He sounded genuinely astonished. Rachel, who I have watched shut down approximately 11 men in the course of our shared lifetime, Rachel initiated. I didn't say initiated. I said you said she acted first. A pause, Mike. That is not something Rachel does. Michael was quiet. I know, he said simply. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The astonishment had settled into something else, something quieter and more layered. She's been alone for a long time, Daniel said. Not because she had to be. Because she decided people weren't. She decided it wasn't worth the risk. He paused. She was wrong, but she decided it. I know. She doesn't trust people easily. I know. She trusted you in 8 days. She trusted the documentation in 8 days, Michael said. She trusted me a little later. A sound from Daniel. Not quite a laugh. The thing that kept working toward one. You're good for her, Daniel said finally. Is that I can't tell you who's good for my sister? She would hate that, but... You're not telling her. You're telling me. Then I'm telling you. You're good for her. I'm trying to be Mike. Yeah. I'm happy for you. Both of you. His voice went slightly unsteady. I'm genuinely, after everything this month, I'm really happy something good. Daniel. Don't, I'm not crying, okay, I'm genuinely not. I believe you completely. You're the worst. I know. Come over Sunday, I'm making chili. A pause. Is Rachel coming? She lives 2 buildings away. I knew it, Daniel said, and there was warmth in it, genuine, unguarded warmth, the first uncomplicated thing Michael had heard from him in a month. I knew you'd find your way back to the neighborhood. I never left the neighborhood. No, a pause. But she did. And now she's back. Another pause. Sunday. I'll be there. I know you will. Sunday came clear and warm. Eli had been vibrating with low-grade excitement since Friday, when Michael had told him Daniel was coming for chili, and Rachel would be there. which Eli had processed with a nod of deep satisfaction and immediately gone to make sure the East Wing junction was still sound. Rachel arrived first, because she lived 2 buildings away, and because punctuality was, as Michael had come to understand, a core value rather than a habit. She came through the door with a bottle of wine and flour on her sleeve from the bread she'd apparently attempted that morning. How did it turn out? Edible. She set the wine on the counter. I used your kitchen. Hope that's okay. You used my Rachel. You live 2 buildings away. Your oven is better. My oven is the same oven that came with the apartment. It runs hot. Bread needs hot. She looked at the chili pot with the focused attention she brought to every system. How long has it been on? 3 hours. Is that enough? It's chili, not a yes, it's enough, I just want to. Rachel. He turned from the stove, looked at her. The chili is fine. She looked at him. I'm nervous, she said. Simply. Like it was data. About Daniel seeing us together. In person. In your kitchen. She paused. About it being real in a room instead of in phone calls. It was real in your kitchen an hour ago when you made bread. That's different. Why? Because nobody was watching. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her. It's just Daniel, he said. Daniel is not just anything, he's my brother. We're only 6 weeks back from 3 years of silence. And now I'm standing in his best friend's kitchen, and... Rachel? She stopped. He called me when he found out, Michael said. You want to know the first thing he said? After the astonishment. She waited. He said you were good at shutting people out, and that if you'd stopped shutting me out, it meant something. That it wasn't random. He paused. He was happy. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. That's what he said. She looked at him. Something in her face went still in a different way than her usual stillness, not the controlled stillness of management, but the stillness of something releasing. He said that? He also cried a little, which he denied. Her breath came out slow. He cries about everything, she said quietly. He always has. Since he was little, and the way she said it, the particular softness, the specific knowledge of a sibling who has held years of private information, told Michael more about what those 3 years had cost her than anything she'd said directly. He's going to be fine, Michael said. Daniel is going to be fine. You and Daniel are going to be fine. He paused. And this he didn't gesture, didn't qualify it. Just held her gaze. This is going to be fine too. She looked at him. You don't know that. No, he said. But I'm choosing to build it anyway. Same way you reinforce a junction before it fails, not after. She was quiet. Then she picked up the wine and said, should we open this before Daniel gets here or after? Before. Definitely before. Smart. She found the opener in the drawer on the first try, which Michael noted with the particular appreciation of someone who never found it on the first try. Michael? Yeah, thank you. For all of it. For being the reason I walked back through a door I'd been standing outside of for 3 years. He took the glass she poured. You walked through it yourself, he said. You showed up at that party. You made the choice. I was standing in a hallway at the right moment. You were standing there on purpose. I was standing there because Daniel asked me to come. And you came because he needed you. She looked at him over the rim of her glass. That's not nothing, Michael. A person who shows up because someone needs them, that's not nothing. He held her gaze. No, he said, I guess it's not. The knock at the door came before either of them could say anything else. Eli's footsteps fast, certain, the footsteps of a child who has been waiting crossed the living room floor. I'll get it, Eli called. The door opened. Uncle Danny. Daniel's voice, hey, bud. You got taller. 2 centimeters since September. I measured. Of course you measured. Come see the East Wing. I reinforced the junctions. The what? I'll explain it. It's about structures and where systems meet. The sound of Daniel being pulled enthusiastically toward Eli's room without being given much choice in the matter. Michael looked at Rachel. She was smiling. Not the almost smile, not the careful version. The real one unguarded, unprepared for, entirely itself. He had not seen that before. Not quite like this. And it was, in the particular way that simple true things sometimes are, the most significant thing he had seen in a long time. "Come on," he said, "before Eli explains Bayesian reasoning to your brother. He's going to love it. Daniel barely passed statistics. Then it'll be character building." They walked out of the kitchen together. The apartment filled with voices: Daniel's bewilderment, Eli's patient instruction, the smell of chili, doing what chili does when it's been given enough time, the particular warmth of a Sunday afternoon that had been, until very recently, the province of loneliness. Michael stood in the living room doorway and watched his son explain junction theory to his best friend, and felt Rachel standing next to him, and thought about how none of this had been planned. How he had sat in a parking lot in a truck that smelled of nothing and almost gone home. How the whole shape of it had turned on one decision to stay. Not a dramatic decision, not a heroic one, just a simple, quiet choice to walk through a door because someone on the other side needed him to. That was all it had been, and that, it turned out, was enough. 6 months is not a long time. In 6 months a tree doesn't grow. A house doesn't get built. A wound doesn't fully close. 6 months is barely enough time to learn the particular sound of someone's key in your hallway lock, to know which side of the coffee pot they prefer, to understand that the silences between you have different textures, and that you've started reading them the way you read weather. But sometimes 6 months is exactly enough time to know. Michael Carter had not planned on knowing anything new about his life this year. He had plans, such as they were: keep working, keep showing up for Eli, keep putting one foot in front of the other in the particular way that a man does when he has made peace with ordinary life and stopped expecting it to surprise him. He had calibrated himself for a certain radius, a certain temperature. He had, without fully realizing it, stopped leaving room for things he hadn't anticipated. And then he'd gone to a party he almost didn't attend and stood in a hallway at exactly the wrong moment and heard a phone call he wasn't supposed to hear, and a woman he didn't know had told him a truth he didn't ask for. And everything had rearranged itself around that 1 hour the way furniture rearranges itself after you move one piece and suddenly realize the whole room works better. 6 months later, Rachel Reyes lived 2 buildings away. She had a job she was good at and an apartment that was becoming, gradually, a place where she kept things she cared about, rather than a place where she kept things she could leave. She had dinner with Michael and Eli 3 or 4 times a week. She had keys to their apartment, which Eli had presented to her with a formality that made both adults work very hard to keep their faces neutral, explaining that keys were given to people who were part of the structure and that she had demonstrated, through consistent reinforcement of junctions, that she qualified. She had taken the keys without comment. She had put them on her keychain that same evening. Daniel knew about the keys before Michael told him, because Daniel was friends with Eli on a level that circumvented adult information management entirely. Eli had mentioned it at dinner one Sunday. Rachel has keys now, with the same casual certainty he used to announce weather. And Daniel had looked at Michael across the table with an expression that contained approximately 11 separate emotions, and said nothing, which was extraordinarily restrained for Daniel, and which Michael acknowledged with a slight nod that meant, "I know. We'll talk later." Later they talked. "You're serious," Daniel said. "Not a question. When am I not serious?" "Fair point. You're one of the most consistently serious people I've ever." "That's not what I meant." He looked at Michael. "I mean serious about her. About this." A pause. "She's serious too? You could ask her. I'm asking you." Michael looked at the table, then back up. "Yeah," he said. "She's serious too." Daniel sat with that for a moment. "She hasn't been serious about anything personal in a very long time," Daniel said quietly. "She's been serious about work, about systems, about fixing things that are wrong. But not..." He stopped. "When we were kids, she used to talk about what she wanted. A house, a family, the whole picture. And then something happened. A few things happened and she stopped talking about what she wanted, and started talking about what was logical. What made sense? What was defensible? I know, she told you. Some of it. The rest I figured out. How? She talks about the future in a different way now than she did 8 days in. When I first met her, she talked about what was possible in the way someone does, when they're not sure they're allowed to want it. Now he paused. Now she just talks about it. Like it's a plan instead of a hypothesis. Daniel stared at him. What? Michael said. Nothing. You pay attention to her in a specific way. Isn't that the baseline? It should be. Daniel's voice went quieter. It should be the baseline. But it isn't always. He looked at the table. Vanessa never. He stopped. I was talking all the time and she was listening, but she wasn't. He paused. She was collecting, not listening. There's a difference. There is. I know the difference now. I didn't before. He looked up. You've always known the difference. I had a good teacher, Michael said. Sarah was the kind of person who made you feel like the only thing in the room. You learn from that. You learn what it feels like, and you can't unfeel it afterward. Daniel nodded slowly. She'd like Rachel, he said. I think so too. She'd also give you an enormous amount of grief about the fact that it took you 4 years and a friend's engagement disaster to... Daniel, I'm just saying she had a sense of humor about timing. I know she did. She would also be incredibly smug that she was right. Right about what? She told me, once before she got sick, couple years before, she said the thing she worried about most was you deciding you were done. That you'd get comfortable with the walls. He paused. She made me promise I'd make sure you kept going to things. Showing up, even when you didn't want to. Michael was very still. She made you promise that, 3 separate times over the years. It became kind of a running. Daniel stopped, cleared his throat. I invited you to that party 11 times, Mike. I'm not exaggerating. 11 times in the 3 months before. Because you kept saying no and I kept thinking about what Sarah asked me. Michael looked at him. You called me twice. I called you twice that morning. The 11 times were over 3 months. Daniel looked at the table. She knew you. She knew that if you stopped showing up somewhere would find you anyway, but she wasn't willing to bet on somewhere. She wanted to make sure there was someone making sure you kept walking through doors. The kitchen was completely quiet. Michael thought about a parking lot. A truck with a useless air freshener. 11 minutes with the engine off. He thought about the word somewhere and what it contained. You should have told me, Michael said finally. When? Right after she died, a year after? Daniel shook his head. She made me promise to be subtle about it, which, she acknowledged, was not my strongest skill. It's really not. 11 invitations is technically subtle for me. That's yes. In context, that's fair. Daniel looked at him. She'd be happy, he said simply. That's what I want you to know. Not because Rachel is. I'm not saying she's a replacement for anything. But because you're not behind a wall anymore. She'd be happy about that part, specifically. Michael looked at the window. He thought about Sarah the way he always did, not the last months, not the hospital, but the particular ordinary Tuesday years before any of it. When she'd been standing in this same kitchen making coffee and had turned around and looked at him with that look. The one that said, I see you, all of you, even the parts you're not showing. He thought about Eli saying, like she was the most important thing that was ever going to happen to you. He thought about a yellow house with roses that stayed the same, even when everything else changed. Yeah, he said. She would be. The moment Michael had not planned for came on a Thursday evening in February, 6.5 months after an engagement party he almost didn't attend. It was not dramatic. Nothing about it was staged or prepared or significant in the way that significant moments are supposed to announce themselves. It was a Thursday. He had worked a long shift. Rachel was at his apartment when he got home because she'd been there with Eli after school, helping him with a math project that had spiraled, apparently, into a 45-minute philosophical debate about whether numbers were discovered or invented. Michael walked in to find them at the kitchen table with papers spread between them. Eli making a point with both hands, Rachel, listening with her full attention and saying, "Okay, but consider," and Eli saying, "I have considered," and both of them so absorbed in the argument that neither of them looked up immediately when Michael walked through the door. He stood in the doorway, he watched, and something happened in his chest that was quiet and warm at the same time, the particular sensation of a piece settling into a place it was made for. Not the dramatic click of movies, something slower, like a door that has been warped by years of weather, finally hanging true. Eli looked up first. "Dad, are numbers discovered or invented?" "Discovered," Michael said. "See," Eli said to Rachel. "That's not evidence," Rachel said. "That's just your father agreeing with you. My father is smart. Your father is very smart. He's also your father, which introduces bias." "Everything introduces bias," Eli said. "You told me that." "I did, and you're using it against me. Again. Strategy." She looked up at Michael, then, and when she saw his face, whatever his face was doing, whatever she read in it, she stopped. The argument paused in the room, like music stopping between movements. "Hey," she said. "Hey, long day?" "Yeah. There's pasta on the stove. I made it an hour ago, but it keeps." He looked at her. At the papers on the table. At Eli watching them, with the patience of a child who has learned that some conversations between adults are worth waiting for. "Rachel," Michael said.
"Yeah, stay tonight."
Not the overnight bag kind of staying, not the careful calibrated kind. He meant it, in the way it had started to mean without him intending it to mean it. The way a word expands when you've been using it in a smaller sense for too long, and finally let it be what it actually is. Rachel heard it the right way, he could tell, because she was still for a moment, not the working stillness, not the management stillness. The specific stillness of something, receiving something they'd been waiting for without letting themselves wait for it. "Okay," she said. Eli looked at his math project, then at his father, then at Rachel. "Can we finish the argument first?" he asked. "Numbers are discovered," Michael said, hanging up his jacket. "The universe had ratios before we had language for them. We found the language. We didn't build the thing." Eli turned to Rachel with the expression of a man who has just received reinforcement from an unexpected flank. Rachel looked at Michael. "This isn't over," she said. "I know. I have a very strong counter-argument. I'm sure you do. Numbers as a formal system are a human construct. The ratios may be inherent, but the scaffolding, after pasta," Michael said. "The scaffolding argument is after pasta." She looked at him for one more second. Then she smiled, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that had been the most significant thing he'd seen in a long time, and had not diminished in significance at all over 6 months of seeing it, and turned back to the table. "After pasta," she agreed. Winter moved through February the way it always did in California, gently, apologetically, as though aware that it was not welcome for long. The cold that came was brief and dry and never quite committed, and by the time March arrived the neighborhood had already started its recalibration toward warmth. Daniel came for dinner most Sundays now. Not every Sunday he was rebuilding, which took time and required the kinds of solitude that even the best company can't substitute for, but most of them. He had taken on a new business partner, someone he'd worked with briefly years ago, a person whose paperwork Rachel had quietly reviewed before Daniel signed anything, which Daniel had accepted without protest, and Michael had accepted as the new normal because, in this particular family, the one that had assembled itself around a kitchen table over the course of 6 months. Rachel's review of the paperwork was simply what happened. Daniel was not the man he'd been at the engagement party. He was thinner and quieter, and had developed the particular quality that people develop after they've been through something that changed the shape of how they see the world, a quality of paying attention that he hadn't had before. A stillness in the eyes that was not sadness, but had come from the same place sadness comes from. He was better, Michael thought, not in spite of what had happened. Through it. One Sunday in March, while Rachel and Eli were doing something in the kitchen that involved a degree of discussion about ratios that Michael had stopped trying to follow, Daniel sat at the living room table with a beer and said, "Can I tell you something?" "Always." I've been thinking about Vanessa. Michael waited. Not in the way you think. Not I don't want her back. I don't, he stopped. I've been trying to understand why I'm not angrier. I thought I'd be angrier. I thought I'd spend months being furious, and I'm just. He turned the beer in his hands. I'm just tired of it. Is that normal? I don't know what normal is for this. The therapist says anger is often the longest stage, and I seem to be in the acceptance stage early, which is either healthy processing or avoidance. Which does she think? She thinks it's healthy processing with some avoidance elements. He paused. She asked me what I was most grateful for from the whole situation. Like, what came out of it that I wouldn't have had otherwise. What did you say? Daniel looked at the kitchen doorway. At the sound of Rachel's voice and Eli's voice and the particular rhythm of people who have learned each other's cadences. I said I got my sister back, Daniel said. And I said my best friend stopped being alone. He paused. She asked if those were the same thing, and I said yes. Michael looked at him. She's good, Daniel said quietly. The therapist. Sounds like it. She also said that I have a pattern of treating the people closest to me as extensions of my own certainty. That when they contradict my certainty, I treat it as a threat instead of information. He turned the beer again. Which is apparently I did that with Rachel. With Greg Powell. He stopped. With Vanessa, I inverted it. I treated her certainty as information without questioning it. Yeah, I'm working on the middle ground. How's that going? Slowly. He looked at Michael. The therapist says the people around me are good for the middle ground. That I've surrounded myself with people who are honest with me, even when it's costly. And she called it a protective factor. She's right. Most people don't have even one person like that. She's still right. Daniel nodded. From the kitchen, Eli's voice rising on a point of some importance, Rachel's voice steady and engaged, and following the logic wherever it led. Mike. Daniel looked at him directly. Are you going to marry her? The question landed without preamble, which was exactly Daniel's style, the thing he'd said about his certainty, notwithstanding some things he simply stated the moment they arrived. Michael looked at the kitchen doorway. He thought about a lot of things in the space of a few seconds. He thought about the keys on her keychain, about the bread she baked in his oven because it ran hot, about the way she listened to his son, not waiting for her turn to speak, actually listening, the way Sarah had listened. He thought about Bayesian reasoning and junction reinforcement, and the particular truth that things worth having are usually found not where you were looking, but at the exact point where you stopped expecting them. He thought about a woman in a yellow house with roses who helped a 12-year-old without needing to understand her first. He thought about doors. I don't know yet, he said. But I'm building toward it. Daniel studied him. That's the most Michael Carter answer that has ever existed, he said. What would you have preferred? Something with more drama. Something with, I don't know, a speech. I don't do speeches. I know. Daniel smiled. The full one, uncomplicated. The one that had been working its way back to his face over 6 months. That's why she trusts you. The conversation Michael hadn't planned happened on a Saturday morning in April, 6 weeks after February, in the kitchen of his apartment, because that kitchen had become the place where the real conversations happened, where the important ones lived. Rachel had stayed the night. She did that more often now, not every night, but enough that there was a coffee cup that was hers on the shelf, a specific hook by the door where her jacket went, a side of the bed that had become, without discussion, her side. She was drinking coffee at the table when Michael came in. Not doing anything, not reviewing documents, not on her phone. Just drinking coffee and looking at the window with the particular expression she got when she was letting herself be somewhere, instead of managing being somewhere. He poured his coffee, sat across from her. What are you thinking about? He asked. She looked at him. My mother's garden, she said. She had roses, behind the house on Mariposa, not the yellow houseors. She grew them from cuttings she got from a neighbor. She paused. I haven't thought about those roses in years. I drove past the house yesterday. And Someone else lives there. The garden is grass now. She turned the cup. I don't know why that matters. I haven't been in that house in 15 years. Because the roses were hers, Michael said. And things that belong to people we've lost, when they disappear, it's like losing the person again. A little. In a small, specific way, she looked at him. My mother's not dead, she said. I know. But you lost her a little when you moved away. A pause. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Have you called her last week? We talk more now. Since Daniel and I, she stopped. Since things changed. She cried. The first call. She cried for about 10 minutes, and I sat there feeling like the worst person on the planet for having taken so long. You took as long as you needed. I took longer than I needed. That's different, Rachel. I'm not saying it to be hard on myself. I'm saying it because it's accurate. I stayed away longer than I had to, because leaving was easier than the complicated work of staying. She looked at the window. I know that about myself now. I'm trying to make different decisions. He held his coffee in both hands. Rachel. She looked at him. I love you. He said it, the way he did everything without preamble, without staging. Simply. The way a true thing should be said, the way you state something that has been true for long enough, that carrying it without saying, it has started to feel like a small dishonesty. And Michael Carter's whole architecture was built around not doing that. She was very still, not the working stillness, the other kind. I'm not saying it to get something, he said. I'm not saying it because this morning feels significant or because I've been building towards saying it. I'm saying it because it's been true for a while, and this is the morning I stopped finding a reason to keep it in the truck. Her eyes were steady on his face. In the truck? She repeated. I had it in the truck. I was driving around with it. For how long? He thought about it honestly. Since the diner. Maybe before. But the diner is when I knew. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her do what he'd watched her do 100 times, the calculation, the weighing, the careful construction of a response that was defensible and controlled. He watched her start to build it. And then he watched her take it apart. I love you too, she said. Simply. No preamble. No qualifications attached. Just the sentence, clean and complete, delivered with the particular courage of someone who has spent a very long time being careful and has made the decision to stop. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. The kitchen did what kitchens do on Saturday mornings. The coffee cooled slightly. The light through the window changed as the sun moved. Somewhere outside, someone was mowing a lawn. That sound again. That ordinary sound. The world maintaining itself. Michael, Rachel said, yeah, I want roses. He looked at her. In the backyard, she said. When I have a backyard. I want roses. My mother grew them from cuttings. You can do that. You can take a piece of a healthy plant and grow a new one from it. She paused. I want the kind of life where there are roses in the backyard. I want to be the kind of person who stays somewhere long enough for roses to grow. He looked at her across the table. Then stay, he said. She held his gaze. I'm staying, she said. Eli came in at 8:45, fresh from sleep, hair doing something creative. Wearing a shirt with a dinosaur on it that he had owned for 2 years and refused to part with on the grounds that it still fit if you didn't think too hard about the sleeves. He looked at his father. He looked at Rachel. He looked at the table at the 2 coffee cups, at the particular way 2 people were sitting across from each other's on a Saturday morning with nothing requiring their attention except each other. He crossed to the cabinet, got a glass, poured orange juice, sat at the table between them. Numbers, he said, pointing at Rachel. Discovered. I thought about it more. You're right. Rachel blinked. I what discovered? Dad's right. The ratios exist without us. We found the language, but we didn't build the thing. He drank his juice. I was wrong. It happens. I updated my position. Rachel looked at Michael. Michael raised his coffee cup slightly. Bayesian reasoning. Rachel turned back to Eli. What changed your mind? I was thinking about the roses last night. They both went still. What roses? Rachel asked carefully. The ones you were talking about. I could hear you through the door. The roses your mom grew from cuttings. He set his glass down. A cutting is a piece of something that already exists. You don't invent the rose. You find the piece that has everything the rose needs already in it, and you give it the right conditions. He shrugged. Discovered. The kitchen was very quiet. Rachel looked at this 7-year-old child, who had his father's way of saying the true thing simply, who had his mother's instinct for the room, who had built a city on his bedroom floor and knew that what you needed was already there, if you gave it the right conditions. She looked at Michael. He looked back. There were things that couldn't be planned. Things that arrived sideways, through hallways you didn't mean to stand in, at parties you almost didn't attend, carried by people you didn't know you were waiting for. There were things that had been growing long before you found the language for them. Michael Carter had stood in a parking lot 6 months ago, with everything he needed already in him, not knowing it yet. He had walked through a door because someone needed him to. He had stood in a hallway and heard something he wasn't supposed to hear, and he had carried the weight of it home and sat with it at a kitchen table and made the choice that mattered. Not a dramatic choice, not a heroic one, just a man who showed up when it cost him something to show up. And everything: Daniel finding his way back, Rachel finding her way home, Eli getting to watch what it looked like when two people chose each other. Honestly, everything had grown from that one decision the way a rose grows from a cutting. From something that already held the whole thing inside it, waiting for the right conditions. Michael looked at his son and at the woman across the table who was looking at his son with an expression that was open and unguarded and entirely itself. And he thought about Sarah's roses and his mother's garden and yellow houses with fences and the particular grace of helping someone without needing to understand them first. He thought about every door he'd almost not walked through. He thought about what was waiting on the other side of the ones he had. Some truths take time to find their way to the people who need them. Some distances take years to close. Some doors warp in their frames and stick, and require more than one person pushing before they open. But they open. When the right people push at the right time, when honesty is chosen over comfort, and showing up is chosen over staying home, when someone decides that the complicated work of staying is worth more than the temporary relief of leaving. They open, and what comes through them is not what you planned for. It is always, without exception, better.